Right now, on millions of wrists around the world, a small screen is quietly counting heartbeats, steps, and the satellites passing overhead. In cockpits at 30,000 feet, pilots are reading their position off a glowing glass panel. On boats far past the sight of land, a screen is drawing the shape of the seafloor in color. And on a mountain trail with no signal for 50 miles, someone is finding their way home. All of these screens were built by the same company. A company that 15 years ago, almost everyone had quietly written off for dead. Because this company sold one thing better than anyone on Earth, telling you exactly where you are, and then the most powerful machine ever built for telling you where you are landed in every pocket on the planet, for free. The smartphone was supposed to be an extinction event. The standalone camera did not survive it. The pocket video recorder did not survive it. The car navigation gadget, the very product that had made this company a fortune, was supposed to be next. The obituary was already written. Instead, the company is now worth more than at any point in its entire history. It did not beat the phone. It did something stranger. It walked away from the fight the phone had already won and went looking for the places a phone could never follow. This is the story of how Garmin got there. To understand the comeback, you have to go back to a decision two engineers made in 1989. Their names were Burrell and Min Kao. Burrell was an electrical engineer in his 50s, a veteran of avionics companies who had spent his career building navigation instruments for aircraft. Kao was a Taiwanese-born engineer with a doctorate, an expert in the brand-new science of satellite positioning. They had met working for the same defense contractor, and they shared a conviction that almost nobody else took seriously. They believed that a technology the United States military had built to guide missiles was about to become something ordinary people would carry in their hands. So they left stable, well-paid jobs to start a company with no products, no customers, and a market that did not yet exist. They needed a name. They did not hire a branding agency. They took the first half of Gary and the first half of Min, and they put the two together. Min, Garmin. Two engineers, one bet, a name stitched together from their own. They set up shop in Lenexa, Kansas, about as far from Silicon Valley as you can get, and they got to work. If you find stories about how things actually get built as interesting as I do, take a second to subscribe. Now in 1989, the technology these two men were betting everything on was still very much a military secret. In 1999, the global positioning system was not something you could buy. It was a constellation of satellites being launched, one, by the United States Air Force, a network designed to let bombs and submarines know exactly where they were, anywhere on the planet, in any weather. The system was not even finished. Fewer than half of the planned satellites were in orbit, and there was a catch, built in on purpose. The military deliberately scrambled the civilian signal under a policy called selective availability, so that anyone without a military receiver got a position that could be wrong by the length of a football field. The bet Burrell and Kao were making had two parts. First, that the government would eventually let civilians have the accurate signal, and second, that once people could know precisely where they stood, they would never want to go back. For a while, it was only a bet. Then, in 1991, the world got a demonstration. In the featureless desert of the Gulf War, American forces used satellite positioning to cross terrain with no roads and no landmarks, moving armored columns through the dark with a confidence that stunned military observers. The technology worked. It worked spectacularly, and every engineer watching understood that something this powerful would not stay locked inside a tank forever. Garmin shipped its very first product into that moment, a market that, for now, barely existed. Garmin's first products were not for ordinary people. They were for pilots and for boaters, the users who would pay real money to know exactly where they were, because for them, getting lost could be fatal. The early units were panel-mounted navigators for small aircraft and aviation receivers that did one thing well: take the scrambled satellite signal, do the math, and put a position on a screen. And here Burrell and Kao made a choice that would define the company for the next 30 years. They built almost everything themselves: the chips, the circuit boards, the software, the cases, the manufacturing, kept in-house, under one roof in their own factories. Most electronics companies were busy outsourcing every part of that to the lowest bidder overseas. Garmin did the opposite. It was slower. It was more expensive to set up. But it meant they controlled their own quality, their own supply, and their own roadmap. And they could turn a working idea into a shipping product faster than anyone trying to coordinate a dozen suppliers. The strategy worked almost immediately. By selling to people who genuinely needed precision, Garmin was profitable early, with very little outside money and almost no debt. While the engineers refined navigation for the cockpit and the deck, something larger was shifting underneath them. The satellite network was almost complete, and the price of a receiver was falling, year after year, toward the moment when an ordinary person might finally want one. The moment everything changed came just after midnight, on the 1st of May, in the year 2000. The President of the United States signed an order to turn off selective availability, the deliberate scrambling of the civilian signal. Overnight, the accuracy available to ordinary people jumped from the length of a football field down to a few meters. A civilian receiver could suddenly tell you not just which town you were in, but which lane of the road. Think about what that unlocked. For the first time in history, a cheap consumer device could place you on a map precisely enough to say turn left in 200 feet. Turn-by-turn navigation in a car was no longer a fantasy. It was an engineering problem, and engineering problems were exactly what Garmin had spent a decade learning to solve. While other companies were still trying to understand what had just happened, Garmin already had the receivers, the mapping software, the factories, and the profit to fund it all. They had been building for this exact moment for 11 years, even though the moment had only just arrived. The pieces were all in place, the satellites were overhead, the signal was clean, the chips were cheap, and hundreds of millions of drivers were about to discover that they never needed to unfold a paper map again. What happened next was one of the great gold rushes in the history of consumer electronics. In 2005, Garmin released a small, sleek device called the nuvi. It slipped into your palm, suctioned to your windshield, and spoke directions out loud in a calm voice as you drove. You typed an address, and a friendly arrow guided you there, recalculating instantly when you missed a turn. For a few years, the nuvi was the gadget everyone wanted. It topped Christmas wish lists, it sold out of stores, and the money it generated is genuinely hard to comprehend. Garmin had gone public in late 2000, and as the navigation boom took hold, its revenue exploded. By 2007, the company was bringing in around $3.5 billion a year, selling on the order of 17 million devices in a single 12-month stretch. Not over its lifetime. In 1 year, its profit margins were the envy of the electronics industry. This was a hardware company minting money like a software company. Garmin's stock soared past $120 a share, and at its peak, the company was worth roughly $18 billion. Two engineers who had started with a name stitched from their own and an office in Kansas now ran one of the most profitable consumer technology companies on the planet. It was a complete, total victory. But hidden inside that triumph was a single dangerous fact, one that almost nobody was paying attention to while the money poured in. The overwhelming majority of all that revenue came from one thing, and one thing only: telling people how to drive their cars. Here is the thing about a gold rush. While you are living through it, it does not feel like a risk. It feels like genius. By 2007, the personal navigation device, the windshield unit, was the engine of almost the entire company. When a single product is generating that kind of money, it becomes very hard to imagine it ever stopping. So Garmin did what successful companies do at the top. It doubled down, and it dreamed bigger. If people loved a dedicated box that gave directions, the leadership reasoned, why not put Garmin's navigation into a phone? In 2007, the company announced its own smartphone, the nuvi phone, a device that would marry their world-class mapping to a touchscreen and a cellular connection. It was an ambitious bet, an attempt to ride the navigation business into an even larger market. But it also revealed how the company was thinking. Garmin still saw navigation as the product, the precious thing people would buy a device to get. They were planning their future around the assumption that turn-by-turn directions would remain something valuable enough to sell. And in a quiet way, that assumption was the company's single greatest point of failure. Because at almost the exact same time, on a stage in California, a different company was about to redefine what a phone was, and in doing so, quietly decide that navigation would never be a product anyone paid for again. The iPhone arrived in 2007. At first, it did not look like a threat to a navigation company. It was a phone, a music player, a web browser. It did not even have turn-by-turn directions. But the iPhone established the idea that one rectangle of glass in your pocket could quietly absorb every other gadget you owned: the camera, the music player, the video recorder. One by one, the dedicated devices started to disappear into the phone, and then came the blow aimed straight at Garmin's heart. In 2009, Google announced free, voice-guided turn-by-turn navigation, built directly into Android phones. Not a cheaper version, not a worse version. Free. The single most valuable thing Garmin sold, the feature that drove billions of dollars in revenue. The reason anyone bought a nuvi, Google now gave away to anyone with a smartphone, at no cost, on a device they already carried everywhere. The logic was brutal and simple. Why would you spend $200 on a separate box that only did directions, when the phone in your pocket did the same thing for nothing, and kept its maps perpetually up to date over the air? You would not. And slowly at first, then all at once, people stopped. The market that had made Garmin one of the most profitable companies in electronics did not just slow down, it began, quietly and unmistakably, to evaporate. The fall was vertical. Garmin's stock, which had soared past $120 at the peak, collapsed toward $15 as the financial crisis hit, and the navigation business cratered at the same time. The company watched its core market shrink, year after year, with no bottom in sight. Every quarter brought the same grim arithmetic: fewer windshield units sold, lower prices, thinner margins, a smaller business, and the great counterattack, the nuvi phone, was a disaster. It arrived late, after the iPhone and Android had already defined the smartphone, and it could not compete. Garmin quietly killed its phone and walked away from the entire idea. On Wall Street, the verdict was already written. Garmin, the analyst said, was a dead company walking. Another one-product gadget maker about to be swallowed whole by the phone, just like the pocket camcorder, just like the standalone camera. The smart money was betting on a slow, dignified decline, the kind where a once great hardware company spends a decade getting smaller until someone buys the brand for scrap. The founder's grand bet, the empire built from two first names, looked finished. And inside the company, the leadership faced a single, unavoidable question, the kind that decides whether a company survives at all. The thing that made them rich was gone, and it was never coming back. So what exactly were they going to do now? The obvious move was to fight the phone, to build a better navigation app, to chase the same hundreds of millions of ordinary drivers, to try to win back the mass market they had lost. Garmin's leadership looked hard at that path, and then they did something that takes real discipline at a company in free fall. They refused to take it. They understood a truth that was painful but clarifying. For the average person, getting from home to a restaurant, the phone had already won, and it was never going to lose. That war was over. So instead of fighting where they were weak, Garmin asked a different question. Where does a dedicated device still beat a phone? Where is the phone actually the worst tool? And once they asked it that way, the answers were everywhere. The phone is fragile. Its battery dies in a day. It hates water, cold, and altitude. It is a generalist, mediocre at 1,000 things. But there are people for whom good enough is not enough. A pilot who needs certified, reliable instruments. A sailor 100 miles offshore. A hiker deep in the backcountry. An athlete who wants to track every heartbeat of a 6-hour race. For those people, a specialized device that does one job superbly and survives conditions that would kill a phone is worth paying for. Garmin would stop selling to everyone and start selling to the people the phone left behind. And the first place they planted their flag was on the wrist of a runner. Garmin had quietly seen this coming years earlier. Back in 2003, while the car business was still booming, the company had released a strange-looking gadget called the Forerunner. A chunky GPS unit you strapped to your wrist to measure exactly how far and how fast you ran. At the time, it was a small, almost niche product. After the collapse, it became the seed of an entirely new company. Think about why a phone could never truly replace it. A serious runner does not want to carry a fragile slab of glass on a long run in the rain. They want a device that measures their pace to the second, tracks their heart rate from the wrist, survives sweat and cold and being slammed against a rock, and lasts not one day but a week or more on a single charge. They want it to understand their training, their recovery, their sleep. That is not a generalist job. That is a specialist job, and Garmin had spent 20 years becoming the best specialist in the world at putting a satellite receiver into a small, rugged, reliable box. So the company poured itself into the wrist. Heart rate, then training load, then sleep, then recovery. Layered on year after year. It did not chase the cheap end where the phone competed. It went for the serious athletes who would happily pay a premium for a tool that took their sport as seriously as they did. And while the wrist was becoming a business, Garmin turned back to where it had all started, the cockpit. Aviation was where Burrell and Min Kao had begun, and it turned out to be one of the smartest places to hide from the phone. You cannot navigate a real aircraft with a consumer map app. Aviation instruments must be certified by regulators, built to brutal reliability standards and trusted with human lives. That makes the business slow, demanding, and almost impossible for an outsider to enter, which is exactly what makes it valuable. Garmin had built a glass cockpit system called the G1000, a set of large integrated flight displays that replaced the cluttered analog dials of a small plane with clean modern screens. It became a standard fixture in general aviation, designed into thousands of new aircraft. These were high-margin systems sold into a market a smartphone could never touch, with customers who stayed loyal for decades. The same logic held on the water. A serious boat needs a chart plotter, a rugged marine display that fuses GPS, detailed nautical charts, radar, and sonar into one screen that works far beyond any cell signal. Garmin owned that world too. None of this was glamorous. Nobody put a glass cockpit on a Christmas wish list. But while the headlines obsessed over phones killing the GPS gadget, these quiet, specialized, deeply defended businesses were throwing off steady, reliable profit and funding the company's reinvention. Aviation, marine, fitness, outdoor. One by one, the pieces of a new Garmin were locking into place, and then one product tied them all together. The product that tied it all together was a watch called the Phoenix. It was big, rugged, expensive, and unapologetically built for people who took the outdoors seriously. Climbers, ultramarathoners, divers, pilots, soldiers. It fused everything the company had learned: a satellite receiver, full topographic maps, heart rate, weeks of battery life, and a body that could survive a mountain. And something unexpected happened. The Phoenix became a status symbol. Wearing one signaled that you were the kind of person who ran the trail, climbed the peak, swam the open water. People who would never spend $400 on a windshield GPS happily spent $800, even $1,000 on a watch that announced who they were. The numbers tell the rest. The company that Wall Street had buried came roaring back. Garmin's annual revenue, which the smartphone was supposed to erase, climbed past $5 billion, comfortably beyond its old car navigation peak, and kept rising, spread now across 5 healthy businesses instead of one fragile gem. The stock did not just recover, it blew through its old highs and kept going, lifting the company to record value and a market capitalization that dwarfed what it had been worth at the height of the gold rush. The thing that was supposed to kill Garmin had instead forced it to become something far more durable. The company did not survive the smartphone by beating it. It survived by becoming the one thing the smartphone could never be: a specialist. There is a quiet lesson buried in this story, and it has almost nothing to do with satellites. When the most powerful product in the history of consumer technology came for Garmin's business, the company's first instinct could have been to fight on the phone's own ground, to become a slightly worse version of the thing that was beating it. That instinct has killed 1,000 companies. Garmin did the opposite. It gave up the enormous market it could not win and went looking for the smaller markets it could own completely. It chose depth over reach. It chose to be irreplaceable to a few people rather than convenient to everyone. And so the company that the smartphone was supposed to erase now sits, improbably, on the wrist of the runner, in the cockpit of the plane, at the helm of the boat, and in the pack of the hiker 50 miles from the nearest road. The same two places where Burrell and Min Kao started, the cockpit and the open water, are the same places that saved them, 40 years later. They never did make the device everyone carries. They made the device certain people would never leave behind. From 2 first names and an empty office in Kansas, they built something the most valuable companies on Earth tried to crush, and could not. If a story about a company that refused to disappear is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe.